Compared to the average human lifespan, a million years is almost incomprehensible. Yet, in the grand timeline of our planet, it's barely a blip. Imagine Earth's entire existence compressed into a single 24-hour day. Then 1 million years would equate to less than 20 seconds on that clock. Therefore, Earth 1 million years ago was nearly indistinguishable from modern Earth in terms of sweeping global changes. However, subtle differences did exist, the most significant being the absence of modern humans. Today, we'll explore who our ancestors were and how they lived during that era. A million years ago, during the Pleistocene epoch, our planet was experiencing another major cooling period. The primary distinctions between then and now are largely attributed to this ice age. Without precise calculations and instruments, gauging the extent to which continents had shifted from their present positions would be impossible. To the naked eye from space, they would appear in the same locations as they do today. However, due to the considerably colder climate, alterations in geology, flora, and fauna would be noticeable. With significantly larger polar ice caps and glaciation extending far from the poles, the absence of certain bodies of water and islands, along with the presence of land bridges connecting various regions, would be striking. The most prominent and crucial land bridge was undoubtedly the connection between Asia and North America. In place of the modern Bering Strait, there was an isthmus that, according to scientists, facilitated the migration of humans and certain animal species to initially populate North America and subsequently South America. Additionally, the British and Japanese Isles were connected to their respective mainlands. Back then, what we now know as Japan wasn't a string of isolated islands in the ocean, but a continuous landmass connected to the Korean peninsula. Britain was one with Europe, not in a political sense, but geographically. The emergence of these land bridges was due to vast amounts of water being locked up as ice at the poles. Scientists estimate that, on average, the global climate was about 10 degrees colder. The sea level was more than 100 meters lower. Consequently, the world map lacked features like the Baltic Sea and the Great Lakes, all due to the extensive ice cover. Instead, in what is now the United States, there was another cluster of large freshwater lakes situated in the western part of the continent. The retreat of the glaciers led to the disappearance of these bodies of water and the formation of the 5 Great Lakes along the border between the United States and Canada. The Baltic Sea is the youngest sea on the planet, estimated to be about 15,000 years old. Due to the lower sea level, dust storms were frequent across the Earth's surface. Coniferous trees dominated the plant life of the Earth. Modern deciduous species like oaks and beeches already existed, but for the most part, the land, especially away from the equator, was covered in tundras and steppes rather than forests. The animal world was dominated by what's known as the mammoth fauna. Besides the mammoths themselves, there was a wide variety of ungulates. Among the predators were the famous saber-toothed tigers, cave lions, and bears. Modern humans, or Cro-Magnons, didn't exist yet. However, human ancestors, having originated in Africa, were already beginning their journey to populate the entire planet and establish their dominance. Admittedly, they weren't yet particularly distinct from other animals. But thanks to their ability to adapt to rapidly changing living conditions, some of them were able to achieve certain successes. Specifically, some of them were able to cross into Asia and Europe via land bridges. Among the early hominids known to science, several species could have been our ancestors or were evolving in parallel amidst fierce competition for the title of the dominant creature. One of these was Homo habilis, or handyman. This species is considered the first representative of the genus Homo. It appeared on the African continent about 2 million years ago, and by the period we're discussing, it had mastered many skills indicating its significant mental capabilities. Habilis obtained sustenance through both gathering and hunting. They also knew how to make primitive tools from stone and wood. Homo habilis earned its name because it is the earliest human to have used tools of its own making. These hominids were about 160 centimeters tall, walked on 2 legs, and their big toe was no longer set apart. Habilis' teeth were smaller than those of apes and comparable in size to those of modern humans. An important feature of these primitive humans was the change in the structure of their larynx. They possessed a formation responsible for creating speech centers, meaning that habilis could very well have communicated with each other using their voices. Unlike Homo habilis, who lived only in Africa, the remains of Homo erectus, or upright man, have been found outside the continent. It seems that this ancestor of modern humans initiated the dispersal of humankind across Asia and Europe. Erectus had a fairly large brain, not much smaller than the brain size of modern humans. They also had a skeletal structure very similar to ours. In the development of their skills, this species was far ahead of many of its contemporaries. Homo erectus knew how to use fire and build primitive dwellings. Also, their hunting and fishing implements were more advanced than those of Homo habilis. Erectus lived in small groups. It is believed that they began to master the making of clothing and the stockpiling of food. Subsequently, scientists identified several subspecies of Homo erectus that inhabited different parts of the planet. In Europe lived the so-called Heidelberg man. On the islands of the Pacific Ocean in modern Southeast Asia lived Pithecanthropus or Homo erectus soloensis, and in China, Sinanthropus. It is believed that Homo erectus soloensis ultimately proved to be an evolutionary dead end and had no influence on the development of Homo sapiens. Their descendants became isolated on the islands and gradually degenerated. Perhaps the last of them fell victim to future Australian Aborigines, who, around 100,000 years ago, were moving from island to island on their way to the green continent. Of all the human species that lived 1,000,000 years ago, Heidelberg man is of primary interest to science. In terms of height and brain size, he was practically indistinguishable from modern humans. It is believed that this species is the common ancestor of Neanderthals and Cro-Magnons. But outwardly, Heidelberg man was closer to Neanderthals than to us. Although the structure of the dental arch of Heidelberg man is almost identical to ours, like other species of ancient humans, they originated in Africa, but then some of them migrated to Europe. It is possible that these populations had no contact with each other for a long time, developing in isolation. It is known for certain that this species used fire and created quite advanced tools and weapons. Also, it was customary among them to care for fellow tribesmen. Perhaps they possessed rudimentary religion and art. Overall, the living conditions on the planet 1,000,000 years ago were quite comparable to modern ones. The hominids living at that time already quite resembled humans. And before the appearance of the first Cro-Magnons, who were already 100% modern humans, there remained only one small evolutionary step: a few seconds on the clock of the Earth's development. We thank the viewers who watched this video to the end. We also advise you to pay attention to other interesting topics related to the evolution of wildlife and the development of mankind, which are presented on our channel.